YouTubes, I would appreciate it. We got a lot to get into this morning, and I'm told, as I mentioned before, that the Fragile Whytes might be making an appearance. Oh, are we live on YouTube? All right. Hello, YouTube. Sorry, wrong voice. Hi, YouTube. Welcome back to the Lurie Daniel Favors Show here on SiriusXM's Urban View, where talk empowers and becomes action. You all may recall several months ago, we had an appearance because I wrote a skit, and it was a skit called The Fragile Whytes. And The Fragile Whytes was really a play on words and the utter foolishness of this notion of white supremacy, this idea that of all the beings on the planet, the beings who showed up last in terms of evolutionary hierarchy or chronology are the ones who are the superior being. Like, I thought it was just utterly ridiculous. I think any of us who have studied white supremacy or the ideas that underline it and the history of how it came into being, we're all pretty clear that that's a stupid idea. But it is an idea that had weapons to support it. Guns, to be particular, or to be specific. And so having a way of talking about fragile whiteness in a sort of a playful sort of way was kind of important. It was kind of significant. And so I don't know if you all saw the news, but the Fragile Whytes have taken over DC. Now, for those of you who are new to the Fragile Whyte universe, I just need to remind you, I'm a Gen X kid, so Fraggle Rock was something that I grew up on. Down with Fraggle Rock. That was like my jam. That was my song. My brother and sister and I, we watched it all the time. And so in the vein of, you know how you have Discovery Channel documentaries, I am Claude and I am here to discover, that sort of documentary approach to looking at beings from other planets and spaces. Well, we took a similar approach to this being, this creature known as the Fragile Whyte. Now, the Fragile Whyte, which we'll talk about in just a little bit, is a creature that is very unique in the planet. It doesn't really find natural resonance in other spaces. It's only a couple hundred years old. I mean, and obviously we're not talking about white people. White people are about 10,000 years old, but Fragile Whytes are very new. Fragile Whytes are only about 500 or 600 years old in terms of human evolution. And we had two characters in this skit. One was Miss Millie Cruella de Vil, and she was one of the hosts of the Discovering Truth channel show, which was exploring this being called the Fragile Whyte. And then we had Mr. Colin Iser. Now, Mr. Colin Iser was one of the reporters out in the field talking to Miss Millie Cruella de Vil about the Fragile Whytes. And so, with that as the backdrop, let's get into today's episode, which is entitled The Fragile Whytes DC Takeover. I am Colin Iser, and I am today's host of the Discovering Truth show. The last time I appeared on this channel with my host, Miss Millie, and unfortunately, Miss Millie has had a fainting spell and needed a whiff of the vapors, and so I am here to guide all of you during today's episode, which continues our exploration of the being known as the Fragile Whyte. When we last met the Fragile Whytes, we were introduced to their very hyper-delicate ecosystem. As a reminder, the Fragile Whytes are the only species on the planet that live in absolute and utter fear of everything around them. And I do mean everything. Is that another being with a penis? Well, then they will measure said penis to determine if it is larger or smaller than their own. Is that a being with hair that grows up to the sun? They will determine that hair must be odd and cannot quite be as superior as their own hair. It's a very odd thing that they do, the Fragile Whytes. But today we are going to explore the cultural underpinnings of fragile whiteness. Now, you may need to recall that the Fragile Whytes come from a very cold and previously uninhabitable portion of the planet, whereas their browner and more melanated cousins, known by a variety of names including people of color, people with various shades of melanin, those people have been on the planet, God, I must say, more than 50,000 years or so, but the Fragile Whytes only appear approximately 500 or so years ago. Now, the Fragile Whyte is not to be mistaken with the actual Whytes, who appeared about 10,000 years ago, still one of the newest beings on the planet, but the Fragile Whyte is a weird subspecies of this broader society, and we are going to explore their environment today, because there is a black anthropologist by the name of Sheikh Anta Diop who has a theory that explains why the Fragile Whyte is such an odd duck when it comes to how they interact with every other thing on the planet. Now, the Fragile Whyte environment, it was cold. It was harsh and unforgiving. They lived in caves. They didn't have lands to farm. They had no access to the sun, and as a result, their bodies physically adapted to the cold. It caused their hair to grow limply towards the ground, as opposed to rising up to greet the sun. Their noses became thin and pointed, as did their lips, to better breathe in the colder air of their natural habitat. Their skin, sadly unkissed by the sun, grew more and more pale, deficient in the melanin that would provide the richness of color, causing them to have one of the more ghostly complexions on the planet. However, despite their physical ability to adapt to this very harsh world, there are several anthropologists who believe that the extreme cold may have done something to their brains, causing them to cultivate one of the most destructive cultures the world has ever known. Oh, I'm sorry, what is that? I'm getting an interruption. Who is that? Oh, is that Miss Millie? Miss Millie? Oh, yes, it's I, Miss Millie Cruella de Ville. Colin Isa, I am here. I, Miss Millie, have been able to recover from my fainting spell, and I'm here to help you to explain the reality of the fragile Whytes. Why, Miss Millie, I was told you would not be able to make it today. Oh, why, yes. However, Colin Isa, there is nothing about the fragile Whytes that I don't know, and so I thought it would be shamefully dreadful for me not to appear. And I do believe you are just about to explain to the good people about this theory that would explain why the fragile Whyte is so very destructive. Am I correct? Why, yes, Miss Millie. If you would love to take along the microphone and take us down the journey, I believe you're going to be discussing a notion called two-cradle theory. Why, yes, Colin, of course, I will take it from here. The two-cradle theory was advanced by a Senegalese scholar by the name of Cheikh Anta Diop. And Cheikh Anta Diop, a brilliant African scholar. You really should look him up, Colin, because he has so much good information, a wealth of information. And though he was from Senegal, he was Western educated. So according to the fragile Whytes, that makes him a qualified anthropologist to speak on this issue. But he had this theory known as the two-cradle theory. And while this might seem a little distinct, it is going to explain exactly what happened with this attempt to take over in Washington, D.C. yesterday. But in his book, which was written in 1959, and the book was called The Cultural Unity of Black Africa, there, Cheikh Anta Diop, again, renowned anthropologist, challenged European evolutionists who argued that the transition of the world from a matriarchy to a patriarchy marked the beginning of civilization. Now, according to the Europeans, they believe that is a patriarchal society that makes you an advanced society. But according to Cheikh Anta Diop, that's just European and dumb and quite frankly stupid. And it is one of the reasons why the planet is facing such destruction now. Now, there is a wonderful article that was edited by Drs. Malefe Kente Asante and Ama Mazama, and that was called The Two-Cradle Theory. You can learn more about this here. In fact, we will share the link to that in the chat in just a moment. But in this book, Cheikh Anta Diop talks about the fact that there were two cradles of civilization that existed side by side. One was matriarchal and African. One was patriarchal and European and cold and brutish and very inappropriately misplaced among the other societies of the world. Now, according to Cheikh Anta Diop, over time, it was the migration of people to these colder climates in the northern cradle that produced very patriarchal societies. And according to Cheikh Anta Diop, the matriarchal societies of Africa and of other indigenous species allowed for an agrarian lifestyle because they had abundance, they had sunlight, they had dirt, they could farm, they had agriculture, they had the ability to stay in one place and not be permanently nomadic so they could learn things and study things and look at the stars and look at the planet and look at the cycles. They could spend time developing and cultivating their brains. However, those who were up north, they cultivated a more patriarchal society. And those patriarchal societies, according to Cheikh Anta Diop, basically were societies that said we are going to dominate. It is live or kill and be killed. It is we will destroy ourselves and sink into cannibalism if we have to, but we are going to fight for everything because there wasn't a lot, because it was cold. They ain't had no farmland. They ain't know nothing about agriculture. They lost connection with the ancestral spirits, and so they didn't have a lot of the things that the Africans and other indigenous people had. And as a result, the fragile Whytes were created out of a cold, dank, dark climate of an inability to share, and that shaped their culture. My Lord, Miss Millie, are you here to tell me, Mr. Colin Isa, that the reason we have fragile Whytes is because their culture was born in cold, selfish, dominating spaces where they had very little and had to basically scratch and survive to get along? Why, yes, Colin, I am. And due to this history and this very illogical fear, they have now convinced themselves that the only way that they, the fragile Whytes, can maintain absolute domination and control, despite the fact that they are the one species on the planet that are shrinking in terms of their presence, is to assert their power in every direction. Why, Miss Millie, I believe that this means that we now understand why the Fragile Whytes never engage in actual competition of any sort. No. This explains why they cheat at everything, and they lie profusely. They never met a moment of their own history that they're not willing to lie about in order to soothe the cognitive dissonance that their dreadful history raises. Whereas the rest of the planet is ruled by a survival of the fittest mentality, the Fragile Whytes seem to rig every game so that they never truly have to compete against anyone. Well, colonizer, this is exactly what I'm talking about, because when you see things like the education system of the Fragile Whytes, we all know that they're certainly not the smartest group on the planet, particularly because historically they've been among the laziest people on the planet, unless they are studying how to take your civilization from you and bash you over the head with it. And instead of studying harder, the Fragile Whytes forbade anyone else from going to school who they felt could be a threat to them. For example, remember how before they used to say things like black people couldn't learn and black people were stupid and naturally stupid, but we knew they didn't believe that because then they passed laws that said you could get killed if you taught a black to read. Well, if they was naturally stupid, colonizer, there would be no reason to pass laws that say you can't teach them because they're naturally stupid. Well, Miss Millie, you have certainly explained a lot to us today. And the reality is that those black people began learning anyway, and then they went on to college, and then they began getting more degrees than anyone. Oh, yes, colonizer, that is exactly what happened. Because no matter what you do to the rest of the world in terms of obstacles that you put in front of them, because they are trained to overcome obstacles, they are going to do just that. And that's why we have the realities that we had in Washington, D.C. yesterday. Miss Millie, am I to understand that it's a Fragile White mentality that led to this attempted hostile takeover of Washington, D.C.? Why, yes, colonizer, that is exactly what it is. In today's economy, the Fragile White has had to adjust their tactics. Now they simply will block you from going to school. They won't give you any education, or they'll simply lower the age of adulthood arrest and to say that your 14-year-old black child deserves to be in jail. And that's why they're going to flood all the streets of the black communities with as many police officers as possible. Miss Millie, you have truly explained a lot to us today, and I'm so grateful that you have recovered from your fainting spell and was able to secure the vapors in order to join us again this morning. But now let's turn to our correspondent, Lurie Daniel Favors, in the field, who will be able to bring us forward into what's happening today. Ah, yes, Miss Millie! Colonizer! So good to see both y'all here. I am Lurie Daniel Favors on the Lurie Daniel Favors Show, and I want to explain to all of you what my two colleagues, Miss Millie Cruella DeVille and the great colonizer, have explained to us today. Essentially, folks, Fragile White mentality is taking over Washington, D.C. I forgot I was in the wrong voice. I'm supposed to be in my voice. I completely forgot which accent I was supposed to be using. Y'all, the Fragile Whites have taken over. And I need us to understand what's happening, because when they continue this effort of spreading policing all across the country, which we know they're going to do, when they continue this effort of bringing in the National Guard, when they continue this effort of ensuring that they are going to take every opportunity to return us to a Jim Crow era, we need to understand their why. Their motivation. Despite their claims, we know that Washington, D.C. has had nothing but declines in crime. And we know that because earlier this year, the Washington, D.C. reality was encapsulated for us in press releases from this administration that said they were so proud of the drop in crime. The only reason we are even having this conversation is because Tiny Sack, Grape Nuts, Big Balls, the wannabe, got his ass handed to him, apparently, allegedly, reportedly, supposedly, when he was either trying to prevent somebody from attacking a group of girls, or he himself was attacked by a group of men during a carjacking. I don't really even know what the story is. I don't think they even know what the story is. Just know that Tiny Sag Little Balls basically got his ass beat, or at least that's the story they're going with. And now Donald Trump has decided that D.C. is a hellhole. It's a shithole country. What it really is a black-led city that is led by a black woman. And every single state and city that, not even state, every single city that Donald Trump named in his press release yesterday, or his press conference yesterday, where he was just waxing poetic and skeeting all sorts of bullshit onto the airwaves. Basically, every single city he mentioned was a black-led city. Every single city is a black city led by black people. And so it's interesting because most of those cities have also reported additional decreases in crime. We've talked about Mayor Brandon Scott in Baltimore. We've talked about the other Mayor Brandon in Chicago. Jonah, if you could please find me the name of the mayor in Chicago, where they have also precipitously lowered crime. We're talking about Washington, D.C., which again, Muriel Browser, precipitously lowered crime. Every single city that he mentioned has seen decreases in criminality. Even New York City, despite the fact that we got a whole ass black ass mayor who used to pretend like the numbers of crime were going up so he could justify buying more robot dogs for the NYPD. What is the name of the mayor? Brandon Johnson, thank you, out of Chicago. And so basically, this is Donald Trump, one, trying to get us to stop asking questions about whether or not his best friend, Jeffrey Epstein, had his name as many times in the files as we know that they did, because we also know that the FBI spent tons of hours redacting his name out of every single page of the damn near Epstein files. I don't know if it's every single page, maybe every other page, we don't know. But he's very uncomfortable about that. So these sorts of shows of authority, we should come to expect whenever it gets a little too hot for him thinking about what's happening with Jeffrey Epstein. But basically, Donald Trump invoked Section 740 of the District of Columbia Home Rule Act, and that's essentially a law that says a president can federalize D.C.'s police force for up to 48 hours before they have to notify Congress, and for a maximum of 30 days before they have to get congressional approval. Now, this Congress is led by bitch-ass men who have the tiny sacks of a big ball's imagination, and basically we can assume that they are going to give congressional authority because they've got the numbers, because not enough of us came out to vote to give the Democrats the numbers to be a block on them, so the Republicans run every goddamn thing right now. And Donald Trump has been citing teenage crime in recent days. One of the things that we know is that the reason they are citing teenage crime is not just to justify being able to flood our cities with police and militarize versions of the National Guard that are going to be doing what they're not supposed to be doing, which is basically policing in local American towns, but they're also lowering the age, not just to ensure that our kids can get arrested, but to ensure that their girls can be sexually assaulted without criminality. I want you all to take a listen to this clip. This is an Instagrammer by the name, they go by the title Under the Desk News, and they do a really good job. And actually, I'm going to share my screen so you all who are watching on YouTube can see this. I want you all to take a listen to this clip where they explain essentially what is happening as a result of this effort, not just to lower the age of criminality. They are now saying they want to be able to charge our children as adults if they're 14 years old or older, but there's something else connected to this as well. And we never have to forget the fragile whites are really good at combining fake oppression to get the world that they want. Let's take a listen.
Do you think that 14-year-olds should be considered adults? Because that's what Donald Trump and the Republicans have done today and are working towards making federal and state law in the coming months. Earlier today, Trump and his goons held a press conference where they talked about the rampant teenage crime levels and the fact that there are apparently roving bands of teenagers out there wreaking havoc on the entire nation. So now Trump and state-level Republicans are proposing legislation that would make 14-year-old people and older held accountable as adult offenders, but it does not quite stop there. They are also proposing that anyone 14 years old and older is considered an adult for purposes of marriage and for purposes of how they would treat sex crimes. Wyoming, West Virginia, Missouri, and New Hampshire all recently rewrote laws that allow children to get married, claiming that child marriage prevents abortion. And the real kicker is, if you can get married at 14 years old, any sort of age difference between you and your spouse that would have been considered a sex crime is no longer considered a sex crime. The Utah Republican State Senate President, J. Stewart Adams, just used his power because his 18-year-old relative was accused of raping a 13-year-old, so he changed the law in Utah to say that if an 18-year-old rapes a minor, as long as that 18-year-old is still enrolled in high school, they're treated as a child offender and not as an adult offender, which made that crime of his 18-year-old relative raping a 13-year-old a misdemeanor, like a slap on the wrist, as opposed to a felony. Make no mistake, this narrative that the Trump administration is spinning that there are rampant bands of teenage criminals terrorizing the nation is nothing more than cover for the fact that they're trying to make the age of consent for marriage 14 years old. The whole thing is wrapped in trying to make 14-year-olds 18-year-olds. Also in today's press conference, yes, Donald Trump did invoke something called Section 740 of the D.C. Home Rule Act, which allows him to take control of the D.C. Metro Police, and he has done that. So what they're doing now is deploying federal officers as well as the National Guard. He also claimed he'll send to the military if he needs to sweep Washington, D.C., removing homeless people and other criminals. He was really vague about that. They will use the National Parks Police to clear any of the green areas that are in Washington, D.C. that you may have seen homeless encampments in the past. When asked, where are you going to send these people to? He said, well, nobody knows where these people came from. A lot of these homeless people, nobody knows where they came from, so they could be deported. Trump directed these police officers to go really hard on folks, saying, you have to knock the hell out of them because that's the only way they learn. They can do whatever they want. They can hit people, especially if they spit at them. So we'll keep following the federalization of Washington, D.C. and what's going on there. But do not let this story about them trying to make 14-year-olds adults so they can marry them or incarcerate them slip by you.
And that, my friends, is one of the reasons why we have to be crystal clear about what's actually happening right now. Let me get the share screen off of here so we can come back to our conversation. So we are in a moment right now where the fragile white mentality is taking over Washington, D.C. It's taking over our criminal and policing apparatus. And it's being used to ensure two goals. Number one, that they will, well, three goals actually. Number one, they want to have police presence in our cities, and they want to do so. Damn, this microphone keeps falling. They want to do so because they are clear about the fact that they want to take over the democratically led cities that are still able to essentially provide some level of resistance. That is clear. Number two, they also want to lower the age where they can charge young people as adults. Why might they do that? What impact would that have on our overall policing system? It would increase the number of people who are now prosecuted and convicted of crimes as adults. What happens in this country once you are convicted and prosecuted of a crime as an adult? You, ding, 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 are now a slave. You're now a slave because of the 13th Amendment, which says once you have been convicted, you can be forced into slave labor. In fact, the only time you can be converted into a slave legally in this country, and I'm not talking about the Jeffrey Epstein rape little girls kind. I'm talking about the only time you can technically, legally become a slave in this country is if you have been convicted of a crime. So we know from Project 2025 that their ultimate goal was basically to ensure that they were going to give police what? Unlimited policing immunity, full immunity. So when Donald Trump in his press conference says you can hit them if you want, you can do anything that they want, especially if they spit on you, what he's basically saying is any resistance, any perceived furtive movements is basically license for you to do whatever the hell you want to those people. That's number two. Number three, it's also to ensure that as they lower the age for criminality, which will have a negative impact for us, they also want to lower the age for sexual assault and consent, which will allow all the Republicans, including the ones in the state of Utah who just voted to change the law so that white man's nephew or whatever family member he was would not be actually criminally prosecuted for sexually assaulting that 13-year-old girl because technically he was an 18-year-old still in high school. Yeah, they do things like that all the time. But now they also want to lower the age of consent because they want to lower the age for marriage. Because if they can lower the age for marriage and impregnate little Jenny as many times as possible, then they don't have to worry about anybody and their resistance. This is another reason why in the previous live we talked about the fact that they are getting rid of your access to birth control if you are poor. Your poor black and brown children, they will be going to jail, but your poor white children will be going to white nationalist Christian schools that will encourage them to take on a Project 2025 vision of leadership where women do what? Nothing but have babies, stay home, and they don't even get to vote. They don't get to open up bank accounts anymore. They don't get to open up credit accounts anymore, lines of credit. They don't get to do any of those things because the 50-year-old legislation that allowed for that to happen will also be repealed. This is why studying the fragile white mentality is so very important. And it's one of the reasons why I'm so grateful to people like Miss Millie Cruella de Ville and Mr. Colin Isa for helping us to explain the fragile whites and how the fragile whites are very much driving what's happening in the nation right now. President Fragile White Dumpy Pants is leading the charge, and he's being followed by a bunch of minions who quite frankly believe that making America great again means making American girls young enough who are able to be rapeable and produce children to make it legal the way it used to be in the good old days. We are going to get ready to head to commercial break. On the other side of it, we will welcome in another guest who's going. I'm very excited to speak with this guest because as much as we talked about the horrible things happening, we also got to talk about the good things that are going on. YouTube, we will see you all later. Talk to you all tomorrow. Enjoy your fragile white situation. Oh, don't forget to like and subscribe and become a member of the channel if you would like. I'm going to begin doing videos explicitly for members shortly. Not anytime right now, but shortly.